like to introduce Jonathan Keren-Black. Rabbi Jonathan has been rabbi at the Leo Baeck Centre in East Kew in Melbourne since 2003. He feels it's important to put prayer into practice and is strongly committed to environmental and interfaith action. Rabbi Jonathan co-founded the Jewish Ecological Coalition. He's a board member of the Australian Religious Response to Climate Change and has been very involved in the effort to stop Adani. Go, Rabbi. And working to switch to renewables again. Go, Rabbi. He feels it is important for humanity to recognise our place and our limitations in the cosmic order of God's creation. In 2016, he received a Diploma of Social Change and Sustainability. Ladies and gentlemen, Rabbi Jonathan Keren-Black.
Thank you very much, and it's good to be here. And I don't want to have the tyranny of the bell, so I'm going to speak very quickly. But I do, first of all, want to say it's a shame that the imam had to leave, but ministers of religion sometimes have to rush off like that. But one of the things I wanted to say is Shalom Aleichem, and you might notice how similar that is to Salam Aleikum, because we have such a lot in common. There are various words that he just introduced you to, such as, so in Shalom you hear sh, whereas salam is a s. So the sh and the s just changes around in the Semitic languages. So he talked about shams, which is the sun, and in Hebrew it's shemesh. And nefesh, nafs, is the soul. And so ruch is ruach. There are so many things that we share in common. I just thought, given that he just spoke before me, I should emphasize those things. Now, I've been rubbing my gum leaf all through the first half, and I just thanked Auntie Joy for bringing that. It's such a beautiful symbol, the manna gum. It's so simple, it's so sustainable, and it's so powerful a message, so I really appreciated that. I want to acknowledge the original custodians of Australia, peoples of the Kulin Nation here, who have never ceded this land, in part because my understanding is they have no concept of land ownership. If anything, they are part of the land and it owns them. In my Jewish tradition too, we have no concept of land ownership by human beings. The land belongs to God and we are tenants on it. Tenants, moreover, whose contracts insist that we look after it and we hand it back or pass it on to the generations to come in good condition. Thus, our tradition, like the indigenous peoples, was indelibly bound up with the idea of sustainability millennia before the term even needed to be invented. And so, as was mentioned in the introduction, I've specially dressed up for you to make sure we get exposure for this important message wherever possible. I also want to say something now about how old my tradition is, and the answer is not very old at all. Now, in rough terms, some people will tell you that Judaism is 4,000 years or 200 generations old, which is twice as old as Christianity and about 3 times as old as Islam. But for one thing, that is vastly oversimplified, or I might even say not really true. And for another, it doesn't matter. When one arrives in Australia and learns that indigenous traditions and spirituality date back perhaps 60,000 years, or 15 times as long as the 4,000 years of my own tradition, it puts things into a completely different perspective. But then, when putting even indigenous traditions against the age of the universe, which current research tells us is approximately 13.8 billion years old, it shows that it's all very relative. Now, I'm not just a Jew, and I'm not just a rabbi. I am a progressive Jew and a progressive rabbi. And I believe that Judaism is a continuing and a developing tradition. Every day, humanity learns more in every field: astronomy, astrophysics, geology, archaeology, psychology, whatever you choose to name. And with it, human understanding also grows incrementally day by day. And so I reject the idea that at one moment, just like that about 3,500 years ago, and at one place, Mount Sinai, God revealed all truth to one person, Moses, which was written down in one book, the Torah. Instead, I believe that humans wrote the Torah, perhaps over generations, seeking answers to the question, what does God require of us? Perhaps in some ways this is inspired by or even informed by God, but it is also over 3 millennia ago, when they did not know of cars or planes or space travel, or in vitro fertilization or nuclear physics or quantum mechanics or the Big Bang Theory. Not surprisingly, therefore, parts of Torah are archaic, time and context bound, even sometimes contradictory. What interests me more are the parts that stand the test and the march of time, the parts which seem to have core truths shining out from them. Love your neighbor. Do not rob or oppress the poor. Share your food and lodgings. Do not accumulate disproportionate wealth. The earth belongs to God, who is both immanent in your heart and transcendent everywhere across the universe, and the God of all people equally, all born morally perfect, all made in God's image, regardless of color, belief, ability, or gender identity. Torah, therefore, continues to be revealed to this day, and this process we call progressive revelation. Though they wouldn't state it as clearly as this, my Orthodox colleagues too would acknowledge that there is some ongoing unfolding of understanding God's will. One way that this has been handled is to say that at the same time as God gave the written Torah, we were also given the oral law, the interpretation, which was never to be written down, but passed on from generation to generation. Here is a wonderful recipe for progress and development. But sadly, it got written down 2,000 years ago, and subsequently started to set and stagnate, and thus we need progressive Judaism today. And I will go further. I believe all religions share this in common, and I heard it from various of my colleagues speaking before me. We all need to have ways to understand God's will for us. Shall we say, perhaps the paths we should follow to create a fairer, more caring, more peaceful, more sustainable world. Surely that is the goal of religion, and therefore I say that it really doesn't matter how old we claim our tradition to be. What matters is, from this day forward, how we draw on the best of what we've inherited, how we synthesize it with what we've learned from the wider world, and ultimately how we treat each other, the poor, the underprivileged, the refugees, and those seeking asylum, how we seek to reach just solutions in often very complex and challenging situations. And being here in Melbourne, perhaps the most multicultural city of the Southern Hemisphere, and participating in a panel such as this one, marking World Interfaith Harmony Week, how very lucky we are to be here and living today. And yet we do have to be vigilant. We have much work to do. There are frequent criticisms and attacks on the young Africans of the South Sudanese community. There have been shameful attacks on mosques here in Melbourne. I was delighted to see the community rise up in Bendigo against the vicious anti-mosque campaign, and we went to visit the site where the new Bendigo Mosque and Cultural Centre is being built just 2 weeks ago. My children both attended the King David School, where, as with all Jewish schools in Australia, there are guards, now armed guards, and fortified sentry boxes to control entry, which we also have to do at our synagogues. Please come and visit us, but do be aware that we need to do background checks for your own security and for ours. So in my remaining few minutes, let me address the specific questions of creation. Genesis says, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, the universe, sun, moon, and stars. By the sixth day, we have the seas and dry land, the grasses and trees, the animals, birds, and fish, all of which God considered to be good. And finally, humans, to take care of it all. And then it was very good. And God rested on the seventh day. From that story of Shabbat, the Sabbath, today, the day of rest, has been adopted in probably every corner and country of our world. The creation story is not, of course, to be taken literally. It's a pre-scientific way to understand our universe. For one thing, it considers the moon a lesser light, as the sun is a greater light. But we know now that the moon is not a light, just a reflector of the sun. And if you follow the dating in the Torah, you'll find it all happened just 5,778 years ago. So what about fossils, dinosaurs, modern research showing 13.8 billion years? Our great teacher and philosopher Maimonides stated clearly over 800 years ago that where there is a discrepancy between Torah and science, we believe the science and understand the Torah as a metaphor. And we just heard something very similar, I think, from the Dalai Lama. I want to share a brief and powerful story from about 1400 years ago. When the first human being was created, God took him to see the trees of the Garden of Eden and said, "See my works, how fine and excellent they are. Everything I've created for you to enjoy. Think about this carefully so that you do not corrupt and devastate my world. For if you do, there will be no one to repair it after you." It makes me shiver every time I hear that from 1400 years ago, given the ecological crisis that our world now faces. Did God make a mistake? Because although in the first Torah reading creation, we see human beings have been put here to look after God's world, and it is very good, by the second portion, Noah and the ark, humans have become so wicked that God, according to the story, decides to blot them all out, to drown them, and start all over, keeping only Noah and his family. Which leads the rabbis to a fascinating, even daring discussion. Should God ever have created humans? To which their ultimate answer is no. But since we have been created, we'd better make the best of it. And by the way, a careful reading of the flood story finds that sometimes God does not say, "There will never be another flood," but instead promises, "I will not bring another flood." So we humans had better be very, very careful that through our negligence and our selfishness and our arrogance, we don't let these ice cap melting emissions continue. By some serious predictions, we should be expecting 4-meter sea level rises by the end of this century. That won't cover Mount Buller, but it will certainly make the Morning Peninsula a lot smaller, and it'll make us a lot nearer the sea here. It's time to transition from mining to renewable energy. Was there anything before this universe was created? Yes, God. We know little about God, the unknowable, invisible power of the universe. We know that God has given us free will to make mistakes or to do the right thing. We've been up in a plane, and we know that God is not an old man with a beard sitting on a cloud. But we declare that the invisible, all-pervading God always was, is now, and always will be. Before the universe was created, God was, and after all ends, God will still be. But Judaism is quite a pragmatic religion. We don't know much about what was before. We rely on the science for actual factual understanding, empirical knowledge, and we don't know what, if anything, comes after, either after our own lives or that of the universe or the earth. We concentrate instead on living this life to the best of our God-given ability to achieve our God-given potential and to look after and to heal ourselves, each other, our society, and ultimately the entire world. And we give that principle the term tikkun olam, healing the world. Thank you.